Okay class, this tutorial is how to actually use CSS to move and rotate and work with opacity and all these different um, ways that you can make things move on your web page. So what I want to do, and we talked about SVGs earlier in these scalable vector graphics I created, and basically I want to use these and animate them. So the first thing you're going to want to do with yours, and I'm going to do this for you, but I'll demonstrate, is you want to make sure the artboard is the size of the SVG. So you can see here that I'm resizing it so it fits the eye. And then I can come up here in Illustrator and make an additional artboard. So I'm going to hit New Artboard, and it kind of gives me another page for a print term, but we're going to be using for web. And I can do this for all of them. And basically the only thing you might have to do is, move things around so they're not overlapping. But this way, each item will be saved separately as a separate SVG. You have to mask out some things if you wanted something masked, etc., etc. But you get the idea that, there's the last one, that you will make an artboard and it'll save that space. So then when I go to File, Save As, and I go to my SVG, it's going to give me an option here to use artboards. So each one will be saved separately, just like when you're slicing images in Photoshop. So just make sure when you're moving forward that you are using different artboards and saving as SVG if they're vector, and you just want to make sure to checkbox that use artboards. Okay, I'm not going to do that because I already did it. And if you look at your folder, close this. So if you look at your folder, in your images folder, I have, germ 1, germ 2, germ 3, germ 4, all the way up till 7. And if you click on these, it opens the XML code that makes up this SVG graphic. So, which is kind of nice. And you could always delete, like you really don't need this beginning portion of each one, technically. It's just saying that it is an XML. And whatnot, and you can actually change the code right in here. So instead of going back to Illustrator, I could change my fill color right here of this initial path. So we kind of went over that before, so I'm going to skip through that, and I'm going to come to our actual index page. So this is Intro to Animation, and if you look at the code I gave you, I'm kind of saving a little bit of time since you already had Intro to Web. I don't want to totally teach you how to do a website at this point. You should have in yours right here, I have 4 divs. So I have 4 boxes. Each one I gave an ID of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So basically just 4 boxes, each one having their own identity. And in each one I gave an H1 title just to keep things, we know what we're going to be doing for this tutorial. First one, we're going to make things move. Second item, we're going to make something rotate, one of these germs. The third one, we're going to deal with opacity. And finally, we're just going to do a text animation. So these are little feelers of how we're going to start animating more things. Okay, so let's go up to our first box here, and I'm going to put in an SVG. And as we know, there's 2 ways to insert an SVG graphic. The first way is actually copying and pasting all this, and I thought I saved that. Okay, copying and pasting this entire SVG XML code and directly place that into my document, just like so. And that will show up whatever, I think it's the eye graphic. Yep, there it is. And it looks fine. But for this tutorial, what I want us to do, and I'll move that over, is instead of doing that, I really want us to just link to it. So we don't have all this embedded code in our site. So I'm just going to do the plain old image source and go in my images folder and choose that first image. And you can choose any of them, 1 through 7, doesn't matter to me. So here we have our image, and I'm going to give the image itself a class. So I'm going to add a class, and I'm going to call it, let's call it Move It, because this is going to be moving. So we have basically a box, a div. That box is called 1. In that box, we have a headline that's an H1 that just says Move Elements. And then within that, we have an image that has a class of Move It. So if I come back over here, it looks exactly the same because we're doing the same thing. There's just 2 different ways to insert an SVG into our graphic, into our HTML. So with this now, I'm going to jump over to my CSS. And we have to do a little bit, because notice how huge it is, because it is an SVG. We have a lot of room to, it's not a set dimension. It's actually a responsive element. So first thing I want to do is kind of keep everything together. And you can see I gave you a background of just this like light yellow color, a width of 80%, it's centered, there's a little bit of padding so things aren't touching, and I gave it a font so it's a little easier on the eyes for typography. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for all of the divs. So I'm going to separate them with a comma, and then 2 squigglies. So this rule is going to apply to each one of those 4 divs that are made, because I don't want to do it separately. It'll just take too much time. So I'm going to add some more padding so the boxes or divs are not touching. I'm going to text align center so everything's not like a jagged edge. And we're good to go. So if you look back, now things are just centered, and there's a little space in between each one of these. And the element's still huge, so we're going to change that next. So now let's go here, and I'm going to say in div 1, there is an image, IMG, and that image I want to have a width of 200 pixels. So I'm being really specific with this compound rule. So notice the difference between if we put a comma, it's saying all of these items. If you do not put a comma, that means that we're compounding it. So we're talking about the thing within this. So the image within div ID equals 1. So big difference between these 2. So now if I come over here and look at it, you can see that the image is actually only 200 pixels. It's a lot more, it's easier on the eye. Okay, now let's actually make it move, now that we kind of have a little bit of a layout. So I also gave it, remember, a class, the image itself, of Move It. So I'm going to put a period in front of it because it is a class. And this is when we can actually do all the parameters that were discussed in the lecture. That, for instance, I can give it a name, and this is obviously important, and I'm going to call it slide, because I basically want it to slide to the left and then slide to the right. We're going to just be moving it around. How long do I want this animation to be? I'm going to say, let's just say 3 seconds. How many times do we want it? So iteration count. How do I want it? Do I want it to ease in, ease out? How do we want this to be? I'm going to say it's timing function. I'm going to say I'll just do ease in. And if we wanted a delay, so we'll just put a delay so you get just to see what it does. So we have all this set, and it's linking to a keyframes called slide, which I have to make next. So there's a second part, obviously. So I'm going to do at keyframes slide, 2 squigglies, and in between these is we're going to set what we actually want it to do. So at this point we just said how long, how many times, how it's going to function, what the delay is, but now what is it, how is it actually going to move? And we're going to use one of the most popular ones, which is the 0% to 100%. So I'm going to do 0%, squiggly, squiggly, and at 100% it'll, oops, squigglies, be here. So how about at 0%, we're going to put transform, translate, x. So x is going to go from left to right. Thinking about the graphing, if you go back to math class, geometry class, the x parameter is horizontal and the y parameter is top to bottom. So in that, I'm going to say, how about we start at 100 pixels? It's supposed to be outside. And I'm going to copy that again, and then over here at 100, how about we change this to 450 pixels? Save. So now I'm going to come over here and we're going to look, and what you should have is a moving eye. And if you notice, we're just moving exactly how we say, from left to right, from 100 pixels to 450 pixels, back, and then it's going to repeat infinitely. Now if I reload the page, there is that 2-second delay before it starts and it jumps to 100 pixels. Right there. So maybe to make this a little bit smoother, I'm going to start at 0 pixels to 450. Oops. And I'm going to add one more at 50% to, so we have 0, halfway, and this, I'm going to go back to 0. So instead of it hopping, it's going to go back and forth. So let's go back here now and just check that out. And look at that, nice and a lot smoother, right? That makes a lot more sense. Now let's just go through quickly, and I want you to try the y. So what if we change this to y instead of x? So y again is going to go from top to bottom. And look at it now, and you can see that it changed, and now it's going to go up and down. So this is a really powerful one here because we can do a lot just going left to right, and it could go right. You can give an x and a y, so it actually is more organic and kind of floating around. Kind of cool. All right, I'm going to change this back to x only because it's going to get in our way with the other animations. So let's go back here. We have this really long name, and remember we went over the shorthand. So I'm going to make a note here, which you can too, about the shorthand animation. And basically we're going to do everything we did at the top in one line. So it's animation colon, the name, which is slide, 3 seconds, ease in. We have to change one thing around. Order is important. Infinite, 2 seconds. And we're going to keep both for this example, but this is all I really need for this to work. You don't have to break it down like this, but you could do either way, whatever you wanted to do. Now, the one thing that you might want to do is next do all your prefixes. So if you remember, I did give a site for prefixes that you can use, or you can do it by hand as well. So what I usually like to do is take the actual shorthand and copy and paste it 3 times, and then all I really have to do is add the vendors to the front. And you have to, I always usually do Opera. You could do also Microsoft, but you can see here, oh, I'm missing one. What am I missing? Let's see here. And if you forget, oops, sorry, you can just Google it. Oh, there they are. So we have WebKit, then Moz, that's the one I'm missing, then Opera, and then MS. So I need my Moz in here, which is a very important one. Remember, Google's your friend to look things up. So now we have all of the vendor presets, we have the animation, and we have it twice. We can technically get rid of this. And let's just go back. You always want to make sure it's still working, right? Delays 2 seconds, and then it's going to slide over and slide back. Wonderful. So that one's good to go. Now let's go to our next animation, which is going to be a rotate. So same thing, I'm going to put an image in here, and I'm going to choose my second one, and I'm going to give it a class of something else. You don't want to duplicate words. So I think this is the lips, yeah. So I'm just going to call this lips. And now I can do the same thing over here. So we're going to call this lips, squiggly, squiggly. And we also are going to have to give a keyframe. But first, let's give it a name. So I'm going to do animation and then the name of it. So in this case, how about we do, we're more of, we're spinning. So how about we put spin, have it be a little bit longer, 5 seconds. Instead, let's do linear instead of easing. And let's only have it happen 5 times. So we're being really specific over the amount of times. Then what I'm going to do is let's be on point and do that 3 times. We're going to have our WebKit. And eventually you will definitely learn a way of a shortcut for these. There's actually programs that do it for you, and you won't. But in the beginning, it's great to kind of do it on your own, only because now you know the order. And then I'm going to do my keyframes. Remember, that's plural. 2 squigglies. And for this one, we're going to do something really similar as the other one. But I'm going to do from and to get some practice with using that. We don't have to use percentages. And this one's going to be a transform as well. Transform, and this is going to be rotate. So you can see here we have options. We're just going to do regular rotate and put 0 degree DEG, semicolon out. And we're going to basically do the same one, if you can copy and paste and save time, 360. So it's going to spin 360 degrees. Now let's give it a name. So this is linked. So this has to be, what did we give this name? Spin. So this keyframe's name is connecting with our animation name right here. Now if I preview this, we're spinning. Again, it's huge. Probably too big, again, because of the SVG graphics. So I can come back here and just say, and I like to try to keep it in order, that in div 2, there is an image, and I want the width to be, again, let's do 250. It's a little bit bigger. Ah, that looks much better. So you can see here we can spin different items, and you can see how this can come into play with some nice graphics as we move forward to bigger projects. And it's only going to spin 5 times, and then it's going to stop. So if you want to sit there and check, there we go. It looks good. All right, let's go back now to, we have 2 more to do. And there's tons of these that you can find. This is unhappy about something. I think it's just because it was wrong. Let's do this again, but we're going to do it 2 ways. So we're going to do opacity, and I'm going to put the image in. I'm going to give it a class right off the bat because I know I'm going to, and I'll call it alpha. I'm going to give a source to the image, which is going to be, I don't know what this one is, but we'll do that for, and I think that looks good. Now, we're going to try it this way, and then we're going to do it again with embedding, so you see the difference a little bit. Now, if I preview this, okay, we have this big swarmy thing. You can see right away that, you know, one, it's huge, but it has a transparent background. There's not a background here. And I want to change some of the transparency as we're going of the actual shape. So with that in here, I wonder if 5's better. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so here we have this, and we're going to do some of the same things. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the size. So in that div, there's an image, and let's take that down to a height of 250. And now let's give, I gave it a div of alpha. So I'm going to come here and put again, period alpha. And we're going to do opacity. So first we'll give it a couple rules. So we're going to say animation again. We're going to call this, I don't know, I had OPA before, so we'll just go with that again. It's going to be 5 seconds, and it's going to be infinite. So you can see how you can be very specific or kind of loose. Like I didn't put in the function timing on this one. I did not put a delay. And we'll come back and do our, go back and do your vendor prefixes. I'm not going to waste time doing that. So then here I can do my keyframes. Gave it my name, OPA. And in this case, I'm going to do a from and to about opacity. So what I can do is say opacity 0, opacity 1. So 1's 100%, 0 is 0%, just how it works. So if I save this and come back, refresh it, notice how it fades out and then it's going to pop in. And then fade out and then pop in. So we're doing a from and to. It's taking 5 seconds. It's going to infinitely happen as it goes, as we move through the function. Now, what we could do is be really specific and have, you know, we could actually do this with the SVG in the div. So let's just do that. So how about we do, I'm going to do 4 this time, just to kind of change it up. So I'm going to select all from my germ 04. I'm going to come over to my index page, and underneath that, I'm going to paste it in. It's going to just look like a ton of junk. It's going to kind of junk it up a little bit. And if I go back and preview and refresh, you can see there it is. So here is that graphic that's slowly fading in and out, and then we have our embedded SVG. So over here, what I'm going to do is now give that a certain principle. So that's actually, instead of it being an image, it's actually an SVG in 3. So they're different of embedding versus linking. And in here, let's do, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give the height 250. So that's the same. And I'm going to go into my index page and kind of look at it. You can see the fill colors and all this and that. And hopefully, let's see if I can move this over. If you remember from SVGs, there is a path. Here. So this path has a fill. So I'm going to actually copy that fill and delete it. Save that. And in here, I'm going to go to my CSS and do, in this div, there's an SVG and it has a path. And I'm going to give it that color, right? Which it already has. Now you can see here I could change that color. Let's say if I want it to be gray, I can change that color then. I have a lot more options here in the CSS. So with that being the case, what I want to do is, doesn't have any color. Go back to gray. And I'm going to make this animate. So I want that color to actually animate in that SVG graphic. So I'm going to be specific and say on this path, we're going to add an animation. We're going to call it, let's just call it, I never know what to call things. Let's just call it Apple. It's my default. 3 seconds, and we'll do it infinitely too. Again, vendor prefixes should be added. And then I'm going to come down here and do my keyframes for it. Apple. And basically what I want to do is my from and to, but this time I'm going to have my fill colors. So it's going to start with that color, and we want it to maybe end with the gray. And if I refresh here, notice how the color changes from blue to gray. It's not really that dramatic. How about if we call this red? Yeah, we can see the fade a little bit better. It's not in my color scheme, but we'll allow it, right? So there we have our color fade. And what we can do is also do opacity as well. So we can do multiple rules on these animations. So if you see, I can do again the opacity at 1, and then over here the opacity at 0. So it's kind of going to do this like cross fade. It's fading out, but it's also changing color. And you can see how you can do things more than once. I could also add a move, do the X parameter or Y, but we have multiple things now on this animation. Awesome. Okay, so last but not least, I want to do text. So I'm going to come scroll all the way down here to my 4th div. And in this 4th div, I'm just going to put a little bit of text. And I'm going to do H1. And I'm going to say, I love animation. Save. Come to my CSS. There it is. Nothing's moving, right? And we're going to give it some parameters. So this is in the div called 4. It's an H1. And they're both H1s, the name text and I love animation, which is fine in this case. And I'm going to give it some animation parameters. So I'm going to give it a name called kern, because we're going to kern it out. It's going to last 5 seconds and infinite. And how about we say ease, ease in and out. Save. And now we have to do the keyframes for that. So I'm going to do keyframes, kern, squiggly, squiggly. And you can see this is really repetitive. And for this, I'm going to do a 0% to 50% to 100%. And with that, we're going to do letter spacing. That's how we can kern at 1 pixel here. And how about at 50%, it's going to kern out to 10. It's going to be in between each letter, and then back to 1. So it's kind of going to pulsate. And there we go. All right, and that is how we animate different ways with CSS.